Good morning to the Caron YouTube audience on this, the 20th of March, 2022. It is 2 hours and about 18 minutes before the beginning of spring. And also a very, very special Sunday on the Caron campus because at this interval of 2 years in which we have not been able to host guests and family, we're beginning to sort of look at how to welcome family and alumni back to the campus. So I'm really excited about that. If you want to learn more about that, please watch Communications from the Organization if you're on our YouTube channel. But anyway, delighted to be with those of you who are with me in the room and those of you who are watching on the live stream, and a special shout out, especially whether in the room or on camera, to any of you who are here for our very first in-person on-campus family education program back here in 2 years. I just cannot believe it. So those of you who are patients here don't know what you've been missing, but those of us who have been staff here for a long time feel this like energy and enthusiasm, and grateful for that. Have a message, and let me move that direction. So when I was growing up, the word soul had, and as a young man, cultural connotations. Soul music, I thought of, and that meant a certain thing to me. And there was at the time, I gather it was one of the longest running television shows since outdone by a variety of others, but Soul Train. I don't know how many people are old enough to remember. I guess it ended in like 2006 or something like that. And so that's what I thought of about the word as a young man. And then when I got into my adolescence and I started studying philosophy as an undergraduate in my late adolescent years, I learned that soul was a debated concept in philosophy. Like the existence of the soul was one of the things that you learned about it. So follow me along. I've been sort of dancing with that word through all the years of my life. And I kind of forgot about those issues. I had my years of wandering and lostness. I get sober, and I was a sober atheist. I go to seminary, and I start, yes, funny jump, but the sober atheist goes to seminary, and all of a sudden, here we're back in the debate about the word soul. And my seminary professors told me that our field of study, theology, and today what we would call spirituality, is often challenged by other disciplines for its use of the term soul in a non-rigorous way. And people in theology have been challenged to provide some sort of rigorous formal definition for what the word soul meant. And this was in the 1990s when I was in seminary, so fortunately we're 20-some years later. And today I want to report in again on the evolution of how academia and the world sort of is banding about this term, soul. And I think there's a softening. I think I've noticed it in the last couple years because I have this history with this word. And so what I've noticed when I read journals and I'm involved in the field of use disorder care, that's what the use disorder is, the technical term for what we used to call addictions. I've noticed that people use this term soul on a fairly frequent basis in various sort of areas. And I'm kind of excited about that. So an example of where it popped up recently, we have a trauma protocol that we use here at Caron, and we also often refer patients who are only able to stay here for like 28 days at their next level of care to participate in trauma protocols. The acronym for the protocol is CPT. If you work in this field, you learn acronyms like it's a joke, but CPT is Cognitive Processing Therapy, which doesn't give you terrible insight into the nature of its method of work with people who have trauma, but it's a interesting and sophisticated training that requires a ton of education and it helps people. And it's one of the models that we use and support. Well, one of my team members, a spiritual counselor who's been here for many years, like a year and a half ago, came to me and she said, "Jack, look at this. I really want to do this, and we're looking to see if we can figure out how to make it happen." There's a variant of CPT called SICPT, and it's spiritually integrated cognitive processing therapy. Sounds interesting, right? And when I got the material and was looking at the research analysis, here all over is the word soul, and in fact what they call soul injury. And so SICPT is a method within trauma care that attends to meaning, purpose, context, culture, history, and this idea that trauma is not only psychically wounding, but soul wounding. And I think it's sort of obvious, without getting lost in the debate about whether the term can be rigorously understood or not, but I think it's refreshing that there are these models that are suddenly using more poetic and not getting lost in the battle of definitionalism to talk about these very, very important things. So that's where I'm headed, is to talk about soul injury a little bit today and about soul retrieval. But another person that is in this line of thinking is a guy, and I don't know how many of you have, you're all Caron connected, which is great. I'm really happy to have you in our circle. But maybe some of you have either watched a YouTube presentation or have heard of, there's a fellow, a scholar who has controversial but gotten a lot of note in this field of medicine called Gabor Mate. Interesting dude. And his signature work is a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which is a cool title. And this book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, think about how poetic already his title is, right? He is a clinically trained and very, very evidence-oriented sort of person, and yet he wants to talk about use disorders, addictions, and about other sort of challenges that human beings face as the product, not sort of a thing that emerges in itself. Like, I get the flu or I get COVID because I have close contact with someone. Like, that kind of disease transmission is its etiology, that's the getting of a disease, is clear from the contact piece. But what is it that makes me have a use disorder? And Gabor Mate is often summarized by saying the distinction that you want to make if you're a Gabor Mate person is that when you look at our client, you don't ask what is wrong with the client, you ask what happened to the client. Which is a different thing, right? Like, so in other words, it's less pathologizing, it's less like you are messed up, and more like, oh, like the fact that you are, shooting fentanyl or, doing crystal meth or drinking or gambling or shopping or gaming or whatever it is an outcome. And there's a precedent thing that creates this captivity that you have to this hungry ghost. That it's a deeper thing. It's a deeper question, and I think Gabor Mate would be very comfortable with my. It's arrogant of me to say that, but my sort of bringing of his work alongside SICPT. Like, I think that when I listen to Gabor Mate and read him, and I think about soul injury, I think there's a beautiful alignment. And so, as I said, the room is full of people who are Caron connected. And that tells me that you likely suffer from some sort of, you're proximal to someone who has soul injury of a certain type that manifests itself in a use disorder, in an addiction. And honestly, I think you can't live without soul injury. I'm sorry. Like, life is suffering. Scott Peck wrote that in the, probably 1970s, and bestseller, it's not news. Scripture's been telling us for thousands of years, suffering is an intricate part of the human experience, and figuring out how to have faith in the face of suffering is a bit of a challenge day to day. But what is your suffering is a really good question. And I think that we can locate suffering in a variety of different places. It may come from family, it may come from war, rape, molestation, right? It's not, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of easy to get hurt today. And don't raise your hands while I say these things, but I'm sure that, as I said, those two sort of camps within which wounding frequently occurs, that there are people in the room who are constituents of the class of people who are wounded by either family, war, abuse, those sorts of things. One of the other things I think is really interesting is if you think you don't have soul injury, one of the other places to look under the hood is in inherited generational trauma, which some people think I'm like flaky for putting a lot of stock in, but as recently as, I mean, as early as 2015, there were some really good evidence-based studies done on Jewish communities that are Holocaust survivor communities, where there were markers that showed signs of trauma inherited and transmitted in those populations from Holocaust experience. And I don't know if any of you have close contacts with Holocaust survivor kids and grandchildren, but it doesn't take scientific analysis to sense and feel it. And today we live in a time where social strife is so prevalent. And one of my favorite terms today is intersectionality. It's a term for helping us talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that doesn't just categorize people, because each of us has a sense of sort of belonging or relatedness to so many different kinds of attributes or labels that each of us is a weird product of these intersections. So the people with red hair, Nordic descent, or African American heritage, or Native, whatever, all these different things, Jewish or gay, or whatever. So don't make me any one of those things, but I'm this amalgam, and you're an amalgam, and where those overlap. But clearly, some of these communities of color, the African American communities in the United States whose forebears experienced enslavement, I think it's not, again, a stretch to talk about how those communities bear inherited wounding. So, it's hard to be a person. And one of the things I've been taught by working at Caron is that we all manifest survival behaviors. What we try to do on a day-to-day basis is, at one level, kind of the best we know to do. The best I knew to do, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I usually say that way earlier in my speaking, but the best I used to know was Johnny Walker Red. That was my primary coping tool. And if I couldn't have it in the morning or midday, I knew I was going to get it by 5 o'clock, right? And then it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So. I think that we're talking about something that's very real and very important, which is that an admission to Caron has antecedent previous prior influences, and that the patient at Caron, the client at Caron, is exhibiting a survival strategy that the clinician calls maladaptive. Johnny Walker Red is not a good solution. I can promise you that. Free arrest for DUI, liver problems, all that stuff, it was not a good coping mechanism. But I'm just remembering there was a thing I wanted to say about these wounds that also I lost in my outline. But neglect, abuse, and perfectionism are these three ways in which I think we get set up as kids of families for struggle. And I think that that's a nice little tool for understanding also, like, that's what happens out there in the world. So if you're wounding, whether inherited, external, or family of origin, or some other, it may be a wounding of abandonment, or it may be a wounding of perpetration, or it may be a wounding of, like, bubble and coddling. And so, some people say, Father Bill used to talk about this all the time. Father Bill used to sort of single out the person who might be in the audience who's like, I don't know, my parents were wonderful, they sent me to the right schools, we had all the right things, everything, why am I here? And Father Bill would say, well, that's actually a setup too, right? If you're set up to be the perfect kid of the perfect family and the perfect life, then there's no room for, which is awful if you're a parent, by the way. Like, one of my favorite scholars around parenting was a guy named Winnicott, whose model was good enough parenting. Because the 1980s and 90s with this, like, you're going to watch Dr. Benjamin Spock or whatever and figure out how to do parenting right. That's a setup for both the parent and the child. And some of us have absent parents, and that's painful too. And some of us have parents who were just, they probably did do their best, but they were almost diabolical as we experienced them, right? Like, I wanted to say of some people's stories, what the hell were those parents thinking? But injury comes in all these different forms, and a lot of it that drives addiction is within the family of origin, but not necessarily. The family can be a good enough parenting family, and then the poor individual can get, shuffled off in some horrible scenario and end up being, it can be one wound that is grievous and unbelievable, a clergy person, inflicting one of these molestation things, or it could be developmental over a long period of time and it only comes to the surface later or whatever. But this is grist for the mill of the work to be done here. And when the focus of treatment is skills-oriented towards craving avoidance and skims way at this higher level of just behavior change without underlying structural questioning, I think we're missing a point. I think that you don't get here just because you're slightly off course. And those are the people, there's a ton of people who can go, you know what, I think I'm drinking too much, and dial it back. But my guess is this crew is not them. I definitely was not. It's one of my favorite little stories, and I have to finish up. But so, one of my favorite stories is in my second marriage, didn't do the first one terribly well, my apologies, but God rest her soul. And but now in my second marriage, I started dating this woman. She's capable of drinking something bizarre, like 6 drinks a month. I think that's weird, by the way. And my thought is, God, if I could drink like that, I would drink every day. This is my peculiarity, right? Because I miss that. I miss the escape. I miss the release. I miss all of the things that maladaptive coping mechanism did for me. And I have learned that I have to find other people in my life, and I have to find other methods in my life, and I have to do the work. So I was going to tell you about a guy, and I'll just leave it be. But in chaplaincy, we train chaplains to understand their work, especially in addiction chaplaincy, as soul retrieval. There's an old AA story about a guy caught in a hole, and people walk by and they throw a rope in, but of course that doesn't help. It would be nice if they leave the rope ladder down, but or they make suggestions, which isn't helpful. And like the person is beginning to feel totally abandoned, and then all of a sudden somebody walks by and jumps in the hole with them. And the person in the hole is like, "What are you doing?" And the person who's jumped in the hole says, "I was in here before. Put your back to me." And they put their legs up the side of the hole and they climb their way out. This is the image that I was taught to teach a chaplain about what their task is to get in the hole with the patient, with the client, encounter the wound, bring my wound up adjacent to their wound. And if it is true that I have found some way out, together we will find movement up, out, and forward together. So, I can't wait to get to this finish. I keep thinking, Father Bill, my dear predecessor here, used to always finish the chapel service with this thing that's now forgotten from the Caron organization, except there are a couple people in the room around. In this circle of love. It was this chant. In this circle of peace. In this circle of love. In this circle of... And then I feel our unity. Love, sweet security. And then, whoa, people do this. And I want to invite you today to the soul train of the Caron enterprise. That's where I'm coming from. I want you to hear what I'm saying. That's what this is about. This is about soul retrieval. This is about rescue. This is about finding new beginnings. This is about getting out of the hole. This is about beginning again to breathe and to love yourself and to know who you are and to be able to find meaningful, lasting relationships, another Father Billism, and to no longer be held captive by the hungry ghosts and lying and deceitful and manipulative and terrified to let people know what's inside and imprisoned by our shame. And you can have that. Honestly, it happens here on a routine basis. That is the hope and promise. And spring is right here, 2 hours from now. But maybe it's right here in our hearts. Thank you very much. Have a good one.